Reading from the Holy Gospel according to John. Jesus said, I tell you most solemnly, anyone who does not enter the sheepfold through the gate, but gets in some other way, is a thief and a brigand. The one who enters through the gate is the shepherd of the flock. The gatekeeper lets him in. The sheep hear his voice. One by one, he calls his own sheep and leads them out. When he has brought out his flock, he goes ahead of them, and the sheep follow because they know his voice. They never follow a stranger, but run away from him. They do not recognize the voice of strangers. Jesus told them this parable, but they failed to understand what he meant by telling it to them. And so Jesus spoke to them again. I tell you most solemnly, I am the gate of the sheepfold. All others who have come are thieves and brigands, but the sheep took no notice of them. I am the gate. Anyone who enters through me will be safe. They will go freely in and out and be sure of finding pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I have come so that you may have life and have it to the full. This is the gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
Usually today, when we speak about a group of people being like sheep, it's not a compliment. We value individualism much more than belonging, although we hunger to belong for community, for the flock as well. The crowd, the consumer crowd, the fanatical political group, any kind of group that scapegoats others or rejects others in order to protect and enhance itself, the politicians who create divisions and hostilities in order to strengthen their own power base. This is the negative idea of the sheep, of the flock, that is a hostile force. But the image that Jesus is drawing on here, from obviously speaking to people who lived close to the natural world and I was in Israel recently, and you can still see young shepherds taking sheep over, at least in Palestine, over the hills. And you sense a relationship. This is the relationship that Jesus is speaking about here. The caring, loving relationship between the shepherd and the sheep that he's looking after. And he says that the shepherd knows them all by name, calls them by name. I don't know whether that is, I don't know, I've never seen that, but the point is that each one is precious and valuable. I think in New Zealand, where there are 10 or 20 sheep for every person, in New Zealand, the people say that the sheep know them by name. But this idea of being known is at the heart of the mystery of friendship with ourselves. That do we know ourselves, truly know ourselves? Or are we slaves to our own desires, our own fantasies, our own neuroses, our own traumas? Do we know ourselves? Are we friends with ourselves? Do we accept our own faults? Because we're not perfect. But we don't hate ourselves or damage ourselves because we are imperfect. And are we capable of faithful friendship to others? There are many levels of friendship. Friendships in which we just exploit other people or use them, or the very superficial encounter with them. But there are deeper levels of friendship. And ultimately, the deepest level of human friendship, where we discover Christ between us, discover the presence of God in human relationship, that is when we discover the ultimate meaning of friendship as the divine being, the friendship that is God. God is love, God is friendship, St. Elred said. So Jesus is describing himself here in this great passage of John, one of his great I am sayings. I am the gate, I am the way into this experience of ultimate loving connection. The way or an entrance. When I walk down the driveway here at Bonnevaux from the gate at the top of the property, I always remember the first time I came here and came through that gate and down the driveway and saw the buildings desperately waiting for someone to come and renovate them. And that sense of a beginning was very strong at that moment. And every beginning in our life contains everything that will happen later. It's a seed from which the life comes and fruitfulness comes. There are many events in the womb of time which will be delivered, Shakespeare says. So living life with this sense of life as a womb, with fertilized seeds, growing, waiting to be delivered, born into this life, but born into a birthing or a rebirthing process, that life itself is pregnant with wonder and uncertainty and a certain level of fear. Will this seed survive? Will this germination happen? Will the promise of this seed be fulfilled? We don't know. But here, in this gospel, Jesus is giving us a profound confidence, even in the midst of uncertainty and fear, that the gift of life is not arbitrary, it's meaningful. That the gift of life, even with its suffering, is going to bear fruit. So Jesus imagines himself for us here, not as the enclosure, not as the building, and he wants to get everybody inside and lock the doors and possess them and have them all signed up as members of his church. But he's the entry. He's the opening. His mind, his heart, his spirit is the conduit through which healthy people can come and go, and in which those who are wounded by their own fears, by their traumas, by their self-doubt or their self-rejection, that in which those who are not healthy can be healed and be restored to health. We're thinking a lot at this time in our world of health and getting this vaccine and getting back to normal and caring for the sick as we should. But we should also be thinking of the deeper meaning of health and how we were sick before the virus in so many ways. And perhaps this virus is also connected with the way in which we've been making even our environment unhealthy and sick. So these are beautiful images that Jesus is giving us here to reimagine our life as a human family, as well as individuals. He's not telling us he is going to capture us, but he is going to be the way in which we can find pasture, find healthy nutrition for ourselves. And we will have the freedom to come and go, he says. That's true freedom, to come and go. And this is the fullness of life that he says it is his purpose and his desire to bring us, as any true friend would. Any true friend would like their friends to be fully alive, to be free. Not the freedom to remain trapped in the enclosure of the ego with its desires and fears and its self-referencing, its constant self-fixation, but the freedom to live even with uncertainty, but with a taste of the promise of life, that the seed of life will not, in the end, be proven to be sterile. Not living with fear or fantasy dominating us, but living with a continuously renewed freedom of spirit to be able to explore what lies at the other end of the driveway, what lies through the gate. Not keeping it to ourselves and not keeping the attention on ourselves, but turning our attention to others. There's only one fruit of meditation that proves that meditation is worthwhile. And it's not your blood pressure, and it's not some peak experience you might get, in bliss or light during meditation, or it's not a sense of superiority to others who aren't lucky enough to be as contemplative as you are. The only fruit of meditation that proves it's to be useful and true, authentic, is that we can give our attention to others, even when in suffering the attention inevitably tends to turn in upon ourselves. by renouncing our own self-consciousness, our self-fixation, our self-centeredness, what Ramana Maharshi calls the I thought. That's the work of meditation. We come and go. We pass in and out of the sheepfold. And we discover that we are in a healthy community, in the flock, not as a nameless sheep, as in a crowd, a consumer, a party member, but we are in a connection with the divine friendship, and we share that connection with others. Meditation, John Main said, is the basis of civilization, because it reveals the life of the human being as the freedom to be fully alive, which is to love, to care for others. Maybe one of the things that we will begin to reflect on through this crisis, as our economies and societies take time to recover, is the value of caring. In most of our economies, the caring sector, caring for the sick, for the underprivileged, for the marginal, is always underfunded. It's always desperate for money. And the caring professions are always underpaid. And the vast numbers of people who stay at home to care for sick relatives or children have often to struggle to survive. But one could reimagine a society in which we saw the value of caring and see caring itself as having a value even at the economic level. And that would be respected in the way the wealth of society was redistributed. Instead of the carers and the caring professions always being undervalued, they would receive their true value in recognition of what they are doing. Maybe that's something that could come out of this experience that we are going through collectively. And if we could see it like this, we would have discovered a contemplative path through this crisis. So necessary for us in order to get through the crisis, and so necessary for us to be able to deal with the opportunities it presents afterwards. For many people, when we're in the middle of this confusion and uncertainty and suffering, the question why is a very painful question. Why is this happening? Why does it have to happen? Why am I more unlucky than other people? Jesus asked the question on the cross, why have you abandoned me? And we ask this whenever we are subjected to acute suffering or loss. Why? Why does it happen? I can't understand it. And of course, there is no answer. Any simple answer would be fake, or would just insult us or God. But in the absence of the answer, or an answer, God doesn't send us a message or turn back the clock. And it's not very sensible for us to fabricate an imaginary response. Or maybe we lose faith, or become double-minded or bitter. Or we may discover a contemplative dimension to life. And we will start listening to the silence and see that the silence is not a refusal of God, but actually a manifestation of God. And as we listen to the silence, eventually, as the I thought, our self-fixation diminishes little by little, we stop thinking of ourselves and we leave thoughts aside, then we begin to recognize the silence as the answer. That the silence is the fullness of life, the love that knows us by name and calls us by name. This would be the fruit of redemptive suffering, that we would have gone through this, but we would have learned something of immeasurable value for ourselves and for society and for our families. And it's why we need people who are true contemplatives, people who don't meditate just for themselves, but in order to transcend themselves, to leave self behind. And it says in the Book of Wisdom, the hope for the salvation of the world lies in the greatest number of wise people. I was reminded the other day by a conversation I was having online with Kim Nataraja, who's doing some wonderful talks on the Contemplative Path website. And she reminded me that between the ages of 0 and 2, it seems that children operate entirely from the right hemisphere of the brain. Not surprisingly, children understand and take to meditation much more easily and intuitively than we do. We have to recover wisdom for the sake of the world, but we can only recover wisdom if we recover our childlikeness. As John Main said, to return to our original innocence.